Hello, welcome back. My name is Ari, and today I'm going to be recapping the 23 books I was supposed to read in 2023. Did I actually read any or all of these, or was this whole experiment an epic failure? Well, let me move over here and I'll put up a video where I actually managed to do my hair, unlike today. And I will let previous me, in the past me, whatever, I'm gonna let her tell you what books I was supposed to read, and then I'll jump back in and tell you what books I actually did read. Alright, the oldest book on my TBR is God, A Human History. This is a history of why humans create a god or religion. I did read this. It was pretty good. I gave it 4 stars, so it was good enough, but I couldn't tell you what it's about off the top of my head right now. So while good, not super memorable. Next up, I have How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kennedy. Definitely need to read this. Like, I read anti-racism books every year. I need to keep it going. This one's been on the list for a while. Another book that I have read, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. Also good, also educational. This was a gift from Grimmy, so thank you, Grimmy. I finally read it. This book is a bit more advanced if you're reading about racism. This teaches you to actively choose to be anti-racist. Instead of choosing not to be racist, you're choosing to be anti-racist. Next up, The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. Next up is The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. I did not read this, and that was an active decision not to read it. There's a movie that came out this year, which was Knock on the Door or something like that. I saw the trailer for that movie and I was like, wow, this looks really stupid. And then I realized that it was based off of The Cabin at the End of the World, which just makes it where I don't have any desire to read The Cabin at the End of the World. The story does not sound appealing to me at all. So I was like, okay, off my TBR. I don't need to read this at all. The next book on here I'm not going to talk about because it's published by St. Martin's Press, and we don't talk about St. Martin's Press here on this channel. But I will tell you, I read the book and it was mediocre, so you don't need me to talk about it anyway. Next up, The Sin Eater by Megan Capisi. Next up, I did read Sin Eater. I enjoyed it. It wasn't the best book that I've ever read, but the story was pretty interesting, and yeah. If the plot sounds good, I definitely recommend this book. If the plot doesn't really appeal to you, then there's no point in reading this one. This is Howard's End by E.M. Forster. Next up was Howard's End by E.M. Forster. I didn't read this, and this isn't one that I like purposely didn't read. I just didn't get around to it. I may, if I have time, try to read it in December. But I think if I don't read it, it's not going to be the end of the world for me just to take this off of my TBR and never think about it again. Next up, this is literally 62 pages long. It's called Micro God by K.R. Martin. Next up is Micro God by K.R. Martin. K.R. Martin is a YouTuber that I used to watch all the time. I don't think he puts out a whole lot of videos, but I don't really watch them anymore. But yeah, I put this on here because it was written by a YouTuber that I was interested in when I put this on my TBR, and then I just kind of lost interest. So yeah, I didn't read this and I don't care enough to even try. Next up is Moon of the Crusted Snow by... I am not going to try to butcher this author's name. Moon of the Crusted Snow is a fairly short dystopian. That's the word I'm looking for. It's kind of like a slow, quiet dystopian following an indigenous tribe in Canada as they survive like the end of the world. They don't really know what's going on in the world other than like the occasional thing they hear from the outside and the fact that their power has gone out. And it's in the middle of the winter and they're just trying to survive. It's a fairly quiet story, so if you want a lot of action or answers, you're probably not going to get it. I do know that the second book in this series has come out this year, and I definitely want to read it as soon as I can. But very good, but not action-packed apocalypse type book. Disappearing Earth by Julia Phillips. And then we come to Disappearing Earth, which I've read. So this is kind of like a murder mystery, maybe, that happens in Russia, in this small town in Russia. And it follows a bunch of different interconnected but not really interconnected people. And mostly the missing or the disappearance of these two girls. And it's a bunch of different women's individual stories that happens around this time and like what they experienced, what they might have seen. Some of them are related to these girls' disappearance and some of them have like absolutely nothing to do with it at all. It's just like their general life in this really shitty area of Russia. It's a pretty entertaining story and mostly about like the failure to believe Indigenous women. Is really like the entire point of this story is men treat women bad, especially Indigenous women. After that, number 10, Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. Then we have Riley Sager. I read this. It was fine. It was kind of interesting because I knew the plot twist at the end of this book. It had been spoiled for me years ago. So I don't know if I would have enjoyed it if I didn't already know what the plot twist was going to be. But knowing the plot twist and knowing where it was going to go, I was like, yeah, this is entertaining. It's fine. I don't have much more than that. Next up is The Kiss of Deception by Mary Pearson. Then I had The Kiss of Deception by Mary Pearson. I just kind of lost interest in this. I didn't pick it up. I don't really mind that it's going off of my TBR. I'm not entirely sure what it was about, nor do I care. It's some sort of fantasy, and I just wasn't interested. Next one up is The Last by Hannah Jameson. Then I had The Last by Hannah Jameson. This is another like mystery thriller, and I was a little bit iffy going into it because I've learned since I put a lot of these on my TBR that I don't particularly care for mystery thrillers, but I did enjoy this. The end of it was kind of like left turn, sudden left turn, what the hell is going on? But I didn't really actually mind that. A lot of people hate it, but I had fun with this one. It wasn't, again, the best written book, but it was fun. After that, I've got Furyborn by Claire Legrand. And then we hit Furyborn by Claire Legrand, and people who were fans of this book might be disappointed, but I lost interest. I didn't read this. I don't care. Next up is To Best the Boys by Mary Weber. To Best the Boys by Mary Weber. I did read this, kind of, no. I DNF this. I DNF this like within the first chapter because the writing and like because the train of thought and inner dialogue of this main character is probably one of the most annoying things I've ever read in my entire life. It was a very, very quick like, oh hell no, I am not reading this. There is nothing about the plot line that can make me interested in this main character. I hate her. After that I have The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. This is about gerrymandering. Then I read The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. This was full of information that I just wasn't aware of. Like I was aware on a very surface level, and this went much deeper. So I'm interested in other books about the subject of like segregation, like legal segregation. Very educational. I wish it was by a black author instead of a white guy. Then I have The Library of the Unwritten by A.J. Hackworth. And then I read The Library of the Unwritten by A.J. Hackworth. This was okay. It was fairly entertaining, but it's not as good as I kind of was hoping / expecting it to be. So yeah, it was fine. But I'm not going to continue on with the series. Next I have All Involved by Ryan Gaddis. Then I had All Involved by Ryan Gaddis. I do have this one as well. This was another DNF, which is partially my fault. I thought this was nonfiction that was talking about like the events of the riots in Los Angeles in 1992. But this is a fictional narrative that is set in that universe. It doesn't have anything to actually do with the riots, but it's like gang activity that happens during that time because the police are distracted by the riots. I wasn't actually interested in this story. I was interested in like a history of the riots. So this one just 100% was not for me, and it was my fault and my misunderstanding for thinking this was something that it wasn't. Next up, I have The Designs of Lord Randolph Kavanaugh by Stephanie Lawrence. I have this book too, but I don't know where it went. I don't really care to look for it. I DNF'd this, so I probably unhauled it earlier in the year after DNFing it. I don't know why I bought this in the first place. It's exactly what it sounds like. It is a historical romance, which I have zero interest in, ever. Then I have Dorothy Must Die by Danielle Page. Dorothy Must Die, I read it. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was, but it's not anything that I want to continue on with. I just don't like the story of the Wizard of Oz. And so I also don't like the retellings of a story that I don't like. Then I have Kingdom of Souls by Rena Barron. Kingdom of Souls I DNF'd early in the year, and I don't really remember a whole lot about it, but I remember I just had a really hard time getting into it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it was just, when I started reading it, it wasn't what I was looking for at the time, and then I never managed to pick it back up. So I have nothing against this book. I just didn't finish it and don't really have a huge desire to go back and try to read it again. Next up is another African fantasy, which is Beast Made of Night by Tochi Yamabuchi. So this is Beast Made of Night, and like Sin Eater that I mentioned earlier in this video, this is about like eating sins from Catholicism. This one was okay. The world building and lore was all just like info dumped on me, which can work but sometimes can't, and this one was a leaning towards can't work, that it was a little too boring. My biggest gripe with this story was just the timeline of it. It was very hard to understand how much time was passing, and that left me very confused and kept pulling me out of the story. So it was fine, not great. I've read better, but I don't absolutely hate this. Next up is Sleepwalking by Meg Wolitzer. Then I read Sleepwalking by Meg Wolitzer. Well, I didn't read it, I DNF'd it. This gave me like super incest vibes, like right from the beginning, and I was like, ew, no thank you. And then 23, the final one on this list, I have A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. And finally, A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. I did read this. It was fine. It was younger than I expected, which I don't know why, because this is obviously for children. But yeah, it was appropriate for the age group, but not like my favorite horror of all time, if that makes sense. Out of the 23 books, I read or tried to read 18 of them. 5 I didn't read. And out of those 5, there's only one that I'm like even slightly disappointed I didn't even try to get to. But yeah, overall it was like I got most of these done. They're all going off of my TBR, and I am not disappointed by any of that. So tomorrow I will have my 24 in 24 list up, where again I'm going to take the 24 oldest books on my TBR and stick them on a list to read next year or get rid of them, unhaul them. Anyway, thank you for being here, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.